best and most blessed greetings of divine light and peace. Assalamu alaikum, beloved brothers and sisters. This is Ihsan, and this is Soul of Islam Radio. Launchgood has grown from an inspired idea as a faith-based crowdfunding platform seeking to cater to the global Muslim community to one of the most successful of such platforms in the world, currently close to nearly $500 million in funded projects and campaigns that are seeking to do some type of good in the world. Generosity and giving are hardwired into the faith of Al-Islam, and in fact, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings upon him, crowdfunded the very survival of the Muslim community itself early in its history, when he reached out to his companions and the faithful to give, and to do so generously that they could afford to resist the Meccans who sought to wipe them out and prevent the birth of a community of faith based on the pure worship of the one God. As we near the 10th anniversary of Launchgood's operation since its inception, I took the opportunity to sit down with Chris Blauvelt, also known as Abdurrahman by his Muslim name, to discuss the founding and triumphant success of the startup he thought of a decade ago. We discussed the importance of spiritual excellence and identity as they relate to work, the importance of giving and generosity in Islam, the definition of crowdfunding as a cooperative means and method to support and sustain valuable projects, the different types of campaigns that can bring people from all over the world together to support a common goal and purpose, principles of success and entrepreneurship, and more. Beloved brothers and sisters, I hope you enjoy this conversation, especially now as we near the holy and blessed month of Ramadan, which is a month both of generosity and of unity for the Muslim community. These two being keys to our success both in this world and the next. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Brother Chris, welcome to Soul of Islam Radio. It's a pleasure to have you with us. And I want to thank you for making the time. I know you've got a very busy schedule, especially with the beautiful and remarkable growth of Launchgood over the years. Welcome, Chris.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm so happy to be here, alhamdulillah. So, long time listener, first time caller.
MashaAllah, alhamdulillah. When we've connected over the years at points, but for whatever reason, we never managed to set together a time to actually get together and do an interview. So I'm happy that we're doing that now. And I've seen Launchgood from its inception to its growth. Now you guys have had incredible results. I mean, now this is going to be your 10th year in operation. And you guys are, I believe, last I checked, over a third of $1 billion in terms of funding that's gone through your platform, which is incredible. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to talk about, what Launchgood does, what Launchgood represents, and you as well as the founder and as the creator of this platform. I think it'd be a great opportunity for people to get to know you a little bit more, and then we'll see where our conversation takes us. So maybe you can start, Chris, maybe just give us a little bit of background about yourself and, how you came to Islam and ultimately what led you to, being inspired or moved to start Launchgood.
There's Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Since this is a little bit more of a spiritual setting, I'm going to start off with a bit of a spiritual story. So I was born, my parents are white Americans, but my father, he received a promotion that required him to move to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And the next year I was born. And my mother has a story, which she's never told me. She's not Muslim either, but she's never told me, but I've overheard her say it to others, that, as I was born, the adhan's going off at the masjid next to, the hospital. And, many years later, obviously I become Muslim. And then after college, I decided to go visit Malaysia and kind of rediscover my roots a bit. And I find the hospital and I find the masjid, and subhanAllah, the name of the masjid, I believe is Masjid Abdurrahman. And my Muslim nickname is Abdurrahman. So I was I'm thinking maybe that's all of this is just from that one moment, but at least outwardly, my journey is growing up mostly in New England, Northeast America, I'm a WASP, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, growing up in that community. Religion, not really a big part of our lives. Maybe go to church on Sunday, maybe Christmas, things like that. When I was in middle school, I followed my older sister into atheism. And I think like for many Americans, you find this dichotomy between religion and science. Religion
Mhm.
only meant Christianity, by the way. I didn't know any other religions. And science, seemed like that was progress, and when I studied Christianity more, I was like, oh, there's so many contradictions. The Trinity doesn't make sense. Like it just didn't add up. So I ended up becoming, choosing science or becoming an atheist in a sense. And then something, interesting happened. When I was 13, we moved from New Jersey to Massachusetts. We moved next door to a family called the Dans. They had a son, Michael Dan, who was the same age as me. We were in the same grade. We were both tennis stars. We were actually the two best tennis players in our high school. But then the similarities ended. He was running with a really bad group of kids. He started doing, I think, drugs and alcohol when he was 11 years old. So yeah, he was pretty much a mess. And as the new kid in the school, like he and his friends used to pick on me. So I really didn't appreciate him at all. But then he became Muslim when he was 15. And that itself is a whole story. Maybe one day you can have him on the podcast and he'll share that story. But he became Muslim. His whole life changed. He did a 180. We started to become friends. I was like, what happened to you, Mike? He's like, I'm Muslim. And I said, what is Muslim? And so he starts explaining Islam to me. I'm like, well, this makes a lot of sense. I'd studied Christianity. That didn't make sense. But this is much more logical. We could say it's much simpler, right? Like there's one God, there's messengers, and those messengers were sent with messages or books, and that's it. So, I liked it. I really wasn't looking for religion. And then I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. I'm sure you're familiar with that, right?
Yeah.
And that book, it hit me hard because I think at that point I was very sheltered growing up, mostly in white communities. I assumed that racism died in 1967 with the Civil Rights Act. And this is pre-cell phone, so we don't have all these, captured, incidents of, racist cops every day or whatever it is. I was just so sheltered. I was like, wow, racism is still such a huge issue in America. And how do we get, fix this sickness, this illness? And Ren, I was reading Malcolm X's autobiography. He talks about how America needs Islam because it's the cure to all of its, illnesses. And I really felt that because racism isn't a problem of laws. That's the symptom. It's really a problem of hearts that gets expressed outwardly, through laws or whatever. And how do you change people's hearts? Well, Islam changed Malcolm's heart and Islam changed my friend Mike's heart. And so now I was like, wow, Islam is actually pretty profound, but I didn't believe in God. And Malcolm's autobiography, maybe you remember this, he himself was searching and he was in prison and he was told, if you take one step towards God, God takes two steps towards you. And I was this young scientist. So I'm thinking, that's a hypothesis. I can test that. I'll stop eating bacon. I'll stop eating my hot dogs and kielbasa and, that'll be my step, we'll see what happens. And I kept studying Islam. I started studying much more in depth, like what is the Quran, who wrote the Quran? Surely it's not from God. Someone had to write the Quran. So I was asking that, studying that. I was dumbfounded. I was like, I could not figure out who wrote the Quran, and then I started studying life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. I was like, okay, what was his angle? What was he in it for? And then you realize that he actually had a very stable life, 40 years old, 4 beautiful daughters, wife, standing in society. Like, why did he mess it all up? And even when he died, he didn't have anything. He died with like nothing, even though he had access to all these treasures, And so I was thinking, like, what was his motivation? Why was he doing it? He's not like Napoleon, it's not like this ego trip. So I was really perplexed with Islam the more I studied it. And I couldn't explain it away. And then I learned about some of the, we call them like scientific miracles of the Quran. And I was like, how could anyone in the desert who can't read or write, how could they have written this book? I was really, really surprised. But I think it also helped me understand that Islam, we don't have to separate our mental facilities and our mind and using reason and rationale with our faith. In fact, they're encouraged to go together. And the final kind of, push for me into Islam was I was reading about death. And at this time, I'm at the end of my junior year of high school. So I'm preparing a lot for my future. Where am I going to go to school? What am I going to study? What kind of career I want to get into? Where in the country I'm going to live? And I realized there's only one thing I'm guaranteed in my future, and that is my death. And I haven't prepared for that at all. And it was just a moment of inspiration, one night where I decided, if I'm going to die, and I am going to die, I want to die as a Muslim. and maybe I'm going to die tomorrow, so I should become Muslim today.
Wow.
And long story short, I became Muslim. I think it was June 3rd, 2001, so 22 years ago almost.
And how old were you at the time?
16.
Wow.
Yeah. In hindsight, it's so young. Like I'm like, wow, I was 16, it's so young. At the time, it didn't feel very young, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like a young man and I could make a rational decision. But it was a great gift, to be honest, to become Muslim so young. Now, if you picked up a little bit on the date, I said it's June 3rd, 2001. And 3 months later, we had 9/11 happen.
Right, right.
And it was such a crazy moment for me because, for a few reasons. We didn't have any Muslims hardly where we lived in Amherst, Massachusetts, which is, Western Massachusetts. So we found a teacher from the Hartford Seminary, very beautiful Saudi brother, but, he's Wahhabi because that's like kind of the environment he grew up in. So that was our initial kind of flavor of Islam, you could say.
Mm-hmm.
And so the 9/11 happens and it's a lot of Saudis doing it and the beard is so big, like Osama bin Laden's beard is so big and he's quoting the Quran and Hadith and like, you're a new Muslim, you don't know anything about Islam.
Yeah.
And you're just seeing like, that looks like a sheikh. Like he looks like he knows what he's talking about. Is this what Islam is? Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? And it was really confusing for me, to be honest. I remember going over to Mike's house and just crying. And I was like, I don't know what Islam is. Now, the big blessing for Mike and myself, we got to go to University of Michigan together in Ann Arbor. And we had, you probably know Dr. Sherman Jackson and just so many other, great kind of professors and community leaders and the MSA and just families, masajid, etc., that helped me see, what Islam really is and what it's really about. Habib Ali Jifri at that time, he passed through Michigan, did a little tour. So, we started getting exposed to more traditional Islam. We did the Rihla program with, Hamza Yusuf and Zaid Shakir, etc. And, that set me off on my own journey around that time to learn a lot more about Islam, to know about Muslims. And I love traveling. So I traveled. I think you're in Turkey now, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Like 2005, I was in Turkey before it became like too much of a tourist destination, and many other places, alhamdulillah. Now, professionally, I'm studying engineering, and I ended up getting a job out in California with Intel, the, microprocessor company. And it was good, like it's all good, but I just felt like what a letdown. I became Muslim. Malcolm X is my hero. I've traveled all over the world and I'm like learning Islam. And like, I just show up to cubicle at 8 a.m., do a bunch of work, go home at 5. I'm like, is this what I'm 22. Like, is this what I'm supposed to be doing in my life? And I decided no, basically, like I wasn't going to do this. And I went back. I'm going to just kind of mix the story up a little bit to make it flow better. It's not exactly how it happened, but that's okay. I'm like half Irish, so you got to throw in some Blarney to your story. But around this time, I was in Jordan studying Arabic at Qasid Institute. And do you know the brother Muhammad Mari?
No, I don't recall.
He's like one of the co-founders of Qasid Institute. But at that time when I met him, I'm like, man, this guy is the complete package. Like, I want to be like Muhammad because he was, Harvard, Berkeley, degrees, former McKinsey consultant, co-founded this amazing Arabic Institute and, married, beautiful kids. His sheikh is there half the year in California, half of it in Amman. I'm like, man, you're the man. Like, how do I be like you? And he gave me great advice. And I gave this to everybody. He said, spend your 20s learning as much as you can. And the thing that most people do not do is when you get good at something, force yourself to do something else, because growth happens outside your comfort zones.
Right.
And I really took that to heart. And he said, when you're in your 30s, it'll kind of come together. So my 20s, like, I was at engineer Intel. I became a high school math teacher and basketball coach. I helped start an Arabic institute called Fawaki in America. And then it's a very weird thing. My life journey is all over the place, but then I became a film producer. We started a film company here in Detroit. We made a film that went to the Sundance Film Festival in 2010 called Bilal Stand. That was a big deal getting to Sundance. And we needed money to finish the film off, and we turned to Kickstarter. So if those don't know, Kickstarter is one of the biggest and oldest crowdfunding platforms. Right. And we were the first Muslims to do a Kickstarter. And I fell in love with Kickstarter. I fell in love with crowdfunding. And I was thinking it'd be so cool if we had a Muslim Kickstarter. And so that was the kind of inspiration initially. I wasn't even trying to start it, to be honest with you, Ihsan. Like I was asking a lot of people all over, like, do you know anyone working on this? I'm willing to help. Like I didn't even need equity or anything. I just wanted to help get the idea live, and no one was working on it. And then I found one friend who was considering it, and I was like, I'm ready to go. Like I'm ready to support you, etc. And then he's like, no, you know what? I did an analysis. Like, it's just not a good business idea. It's going to be like way too much work and not enough returns. And he's like, but you can do it if you want. And I was like, man, I guess I have to do it. Like, the only way it's going to come to life is if I take it on. And in a sense, with entrepreneurship, and ignorance is bliss, because it's definitely been a labor of love. It's been super hard. But alhamdulillah, like we're 10 years in now to Launchgood. I feel like I have the best job in the world, and I wouldn't change anything in my life. You know, even GoFundMe, like we had a meeting with the CEO of GoFundMe a few years ago, and they straight up asked us, would we be interested in selling? And that would be life-changing money for sure, right?
Right.
And instantly my answer is like, heck no way. Because money's just money at the end of the day. Like, what are you going to do with it, right?
Purpose is
in life.
Right.
So yeah, alhamdulillah. I'm very
that's
grateful.
Amazing. That's amazing because you know, the challenge between purpose versus profit, it's a struggle that a lot of people have. And so I mean, it seems to me like this idea settled in your heart, or was inspired in your heart, was in your heart. And even though friends and others thought maybe it's not going to be a viable idea, you still felt like you've got to do this, like it has to be done. Somebody has to do this. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, you know, I remember one time I already mentioned I'd studied Arabic in Jordan. I remember one time I was in Jordan, I grabbed a taxi. You know, obviously I'm like a white American speaking Arabic. So the cab drivers always want to know, what's my story? Like, why, you know, what are you doing here? And who are you? And I explained, you know, I'm American, Muslim, my story. And then when he found out I'm American, he starts going off, oh, America, Shaitan, Israel, you know, like everything, right? And really upset. And rightfully so. We have terrible foreign policy, you know, in America. May God change it. And we get to my destination, and there's a masjid there, and Maghrib was just starting. And I was like, I'm going to go in the mosque and pray Maghrib. Do you want to come with me? And he's like, you go pray. I'm going to have a smoke. And that was that kind of mindset I found all over the Muslim world, which is like, we have so many problems, and we're very happy to talk about our problems, but we don't feel empowered to try to solve them, even if it's in the smallest ways. And I find that antithetical to the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You know, he said, you know, give charity even if it's half a date, or if it's the day of judgment and you can plant a sapling, plant it, even though you'll never get to see it grow, you know, and it will never grow because of the situation. But is this idea of whatever good you can do, you do as a Muslim. And so with crowdfunding, with Launchgood, like the real inspiration for me wasn't about the money. It was about, if we had one place, a platform that showed so many Muslims around the world proactively, you know, trying to do their thing to make the world a little bit better, we have a storybook of inspiration that the next generation can feed off, and the next generation, it grows and grows and grows organically. And, you know, alhamdulillah, I think that's exactly what we found with Launchgood. You know, that is the story of Launchgood. I remember when we began, in a whole month, we might get 3-4 campaigns. Right. You know, and I'm pretty well connected guy. I'm like calling people and I'm trying to convince them, like, oh, you should do a crowdfunding campaign. They're like, what's that? Why would I do it? Now, you know, mashallah, it's second nature. And every day we have, you know, probably over 100 people coming to the website to create fundraising campaigns for something. Mashallah. So it's, alhamdulillah, you know, it's really, Launchgood is meant to be not a fundraising platform as much an inspiration platform. And I really did feel that this is what our community needs, is to speak to, like, lift up our own self-esteem, you know. Right. It's been a rough 100 years, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully it'll start to turn, or it is starting to turn. When did you know with Launchgood that this would survive, that this would be viable, that you guys would be able to see this through to success?
Probably around 3 years in.
Okay.
You know, I'm very blessed with my parents, especially they're both entrepreneurs and successful entrepreneurs. And so my mother, she gave me advice that you have to give whatever business you're doing about 3 years to know whether it's going to work or not.
Mm-hmm.
So like the first year of our film business, it was great. We went to Sundance, we were making all this money, traveling the world, like we were big shots, and it really seemed like we're going to turn this into a major studio. By year 3, it was clearly like game over, like we're done, there's no more money and different reasons, like it wasn't going to keep going. And Launchgood, it was like, I didn't even get paid the first 3 years, so it was financially a struggle. But what we noticed is like every year our revenue was doubling. And I'm a math, I used to be a math teacher, so I know the power of exponential growth, that if you just keep doubling, eventually it's going to really, kind of take off. Mm-hmm. And we saw that around year 3, our revenue started to really hit this growth factor where we could start to pay people, because up to that point, other than our developers, almost everybody at Launchgood was a volunteer. And we tried to raise money from Silicon Valley. We totally failed. We tried twice to do that. We couldn't raise any money for our company. Nobody thought it was going to work. But, alhamdulillah, say around year 3, it was like, okay, no, this is going to work.
MashaAllah.
And today we have like about 100 employees and, across the world, all paid part-time and full-time. And so it is working, alhamdulillah.
What would you say, Brother Chris, in terms of, so you've traveled the Muslim world, you've interacted with a lot of people, like the gentleman you mentioned, right, the cab driver, and he's complaining about America and all of its problems and foreign policy. And then instead of going into the mosque to pray and turn towards Allah, then the alternative is just to hang out and smoke a cigarette. So on the one hand, there's, let's say, disgruntlement or dissatisfaction with the state of the affairs of the world. And then there's the question of faith. And then turning towards faith to actually move towards some sort of positive outcome or a solution. What would you say in terms of your experience throughout the Muslim world and also with the work that you guys are doing about the importance of, let's say, leaning first and foremost and turning towards faith as for guidance, for inspiration, in terms of making a positive impact in the world rather than purely secular solutions or just complaint and disgruntlement?
It's a good question. I haven't thought about it, so I'm talking as I'm thinking here, which is terribly dangerous. This morning, like I got up, I click a button on this water heater. I have like instant hot water to make a nice cup of tea. And, I get in a shower and I turn a knob and it's like instant hot water and I can drink that water and it's clean and I can run it for as long as I want. And I get in a car and I like fly down a highway and, we live, I think sometimes we forget how much blessing we live in, right? If we can, and nothing I described in my morning routine is exceptional, like at least in America, right? And I think most of the modern world, most of your listeners, like this is like, even low-income people have the same morning experience, we could say. But if you compare that to kings from like 200-300 years ago, like the highest of society, they didn't have those luxuries, right? So I think a lot of our problems are not in the material. I think it's within the soul. And it's really a question I want to ask you because there's something I've thought related. I know I'm not in answer your question, forgive me, but why not make this a little bit for my own benefit? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like this thing really bothers me, right? Because the idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is like, at the very base level, we got to take care of people's, basic needs, food, shelter. And then, it works up, and you get to the top. And then it's like, that's where people can get spiritual enlightenment. And I think about, I'm like, the people in the past had barely anything at the bottom of that pyramid, but you could find the spiritually enlightened. And in fact, many of the people who have the foundation of their pyramid firmly established, they're the farthest from reaching spiritual enlightenment. So I guess, I'm kind of curious to hear your own take. How would you answer that, your own question?
Well, regarding that, right, the hierarchy of needs, I suppose what it points to is that so much of spiritual development takes place under pressure. I say that diamonds are formed under immense pressure and over a period of time. But the way that the hierarchy of needs, I think the way that he's positioning it essentially states that when the base needs are met, right, that frees us to be able to think of higher order needs. But I think the reality is that doesn't always happen for most people. But I think it also has a lot to do with the paradigm in the world that we live in. where there's so much emphasis given on the material, to the point that you have even religion getting co-opted into what may be called like a prosperity paradigm or prosperity gospel, where your worldly success is a direct reflection, apparently, of your spiritual station and rank. But I remember when I traveled to Afghanistan some years ago, and I was taught throughout my life, growing up in the West, that your sense of peace and comfort, and even your sense of self, was dependent on your worldly possessions or rank or status. And I go to a country where that model doesn't really exist, and the poorest of people tended to be surprisingly the happiest of people oftentimes. And it's a different paradigm. That's a faith-based paradigm, because they drew their sense of self and their identity primarily from faith and from God, rather than from their material achievements and status. So, I mean, I also remember, right, the verse of the Quran in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I will not change the condition of a people until they first change what is within themselves. And this is the mistake, and I think the error that we fall into often as a ummah in the modern world, is that we tend to look towards practical solutions before first dealing with, like you said, the soul, where the real origin of a lot of our problems and issues stem from. So, I mean, that's been my observation. And I was kind of wondering, right, if you agreed with that, and if that's something that you've seen as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with that. And that's where I think when you talk about, could we find faith-inspired solutions to the problems of the world? Absolutely. But less the material problems of the world, more these, like the mental health crisis we're facing, which is, it's serious. Like so many people are unhappy today.
Yeah.
So many people feel disconnected. And, like I'm very active on Twitter. It's fascinating. Like people are trying to take a scientific approach to it. And I really commend them because they're like figuring out a lot of the pieces, but not able to put the whole together. Like, so one of them now, for example, is like, people are realizing relationships really matter, and there's a lot of scientific evidence for that. And the big thing I noticed, there's a viral thread the other day about alcohol, how like no amount of alcohol is the safe amount of alcohol. And these are people who are like atheists saying this, and it's like, okay, like they're getting the pieces bit by bit, they're getting these pieces, but they don't see like Islam has it all together as one package,
I'd even seen an article some years ago, and I've got to find it, which said that the bulk of our financial economic problems in the country would be solved if just the wealthy donated 2.5% of their wealth and gave that in taxes, because the wealthy typically don't pay anything in taxes. But this would have been a tax on like actual, sustained wealth. And I mean,
I actually did a whole like mathematical model of this when I was a math teacher, because I was single, I didn't have kids, so I had time. So after school, I was working on this, and I was like, how much would it take to replace our tax revenue if we got rid of the income tax in America and replaced it with wealth tax? And it was almost like exactly 2.5%. I think even less. I think it was like 2%. Wow. And if you ask me, like, would I rather pay 2% on my wealth or 25% on my income? Like, yeah, definitely take 2% of my wealth. Much more manageable.
Much more fair.
Much more fair.
And
even
from
an economic standpoint, it makes sense. You don't want to, taxes are a penalty that influence behavior. It de-incentivizes something, right? And so if you tax income, you de-incentivize earning, which is the opposite of what you want to do in an economy. But if you tax wealth, you de-incentivize hoarding, which is a great thing to do.
Wow. And for people that may not know, right, 2.5% is the amount of zakat that is required as a pillar of Islam. So it's like a very specific and perfect, apparently, number that even now, like you said, scientists will say this is what should be happening. For people that don't know, Brother Chris, and I think most people are aware at this point, but just maybe briefly explain, what is crowdfunding?
Oh, that's a great question. Crowdfunding is bringing a crowd of people together to fund something, right? So in the past, taxes, what we were talking about, taxes, I guess, technically are a form of crowdfunding, right? We're taking money, but
forced crowdfunding.
Yeah, forced crowdfunding, involuntary crowdfunding, right? Like taking money from you. But when people talk about crowdfunding today, at least donation-based crowdfunding, what we're mostly talking about is, there's a crisis in Turkey and Syria, there's an earthquake, a lot of people died and are suffering. So people, raise money, they all chip in money and donate and try to help a cause, right? Or maybe you have a friend who's sick and they need to get a medical treatment that they have difficulty affording. So you all chip in some money to help them pay for that treatment. So, that's crowdfunding. It can also be in a very proactive way. It doesn't always have to be, sad circumstances that lead to it. So we have over, I think in your neck of the woods, are you in Istanbul now?
No, I'm actually in the south at the moment.
In the south, but I think you probably know Sidi Harun Sugic, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah. In fact, we had him on the podcast just last year.
MashaAllah. So I'm sure he talked about his book series, The Exemplars,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the topic.
That was the topic. That's what I figured. Yep. Actually, I think I remember seeing that now. That was crowdfunding on Launchgood, right? Whereas they want him and Sidi Peter Abdul Sanders, they want to put together this, we could say mini biographies of just incredible Muslim saints from recent history, but it costs money. This stuff, you got to pay people to write the stories, to edit the stories, to put together the book, to manufacture the book, to ship the book. Like it's a lot of, these things aren't free. And they did a crowdfunding campaign on Launchgood that raised, over $80,000, alhamdulillah, which, played a big part in bringing that series to life. So crowdfunding can be used a lot of ways, but at its essence is bringing together a group of people to fund something.
What a brilliant platform to make things like this possible. So over your time with Launchgood, what are some of your favorite crowdfunding programs that have been done, and what have been maybe some of the most interesting?
It used to be so easy for me to answer this in the early days of Launchgood, because for years 1, 2, 3, every single campaign, I either coached it or my co-founder, Amani Kalawi, she coached it. So we knew everybody, we knew every campaign, like it was very intimate for us. Now, mashallah, it's like grown so big. So I don't know the vast majority of the people. And I feel, this is just a preface. I'm going to answer your question, but I feel bad even answering this question because there's probably so many amazing ones that I don't even know about because I'm, operating at a different level for the company at the moment. Mm-hmm. But I will say, there's so definitely, the exemplars, and I would say even before that, the Meetings with Mountains book by Peter Sanders.
Right. Yeah. In fact, I saw you at the book launch for that in Detroit at the time.
That's right.
That's where we last connected. Yeah.
That's right. That was just like so humbling for me, because this is somebody who spent their life, in that case, Peter Sanders, 50 years or so photographing these people. And this is his kind of penultimate work. And he's relying on us to bring it to life. And he's really, at that point, like he's really worried, oh, he needs at least 50,000 pounds, I think it was. And he's thinking, that's so much. Like, there's no way. Now, how are we going to do this? And alhamdulillah, I know it's not a lot, for someone with that sort of reputation in the community, and we're able to help fund it. So we do one small thing and we get to be part of a historic project. And we've had so many of those. I think Meetings with Mountains is one great example. The other ones, it's kind of inspired by tragedy, which is always sad. There are two that come to mind. One is just recently with the Turkey response. So, a terrible, terrible earthquake in Turkey. And right away, my team, and I think it happened. You were there. I mean, you must have felt it, right?
Fortunately, I was just outside of the affected area. So where I am now is not on the fault line. So fortunately, I'm only a few hundred miles away from the place, but where I am didn't get hit directly. But we experienced it, of course, just in the environment in terms of people and the reaction and the losses.
And it happened, what was it, like Fajr time or something on a Monday morning?
Yeah.
So I was asleep. This was like our Sunday night. But because we have a global team, we have people in the UK and Turkey and Lebanon and Malaysia, Australia, etc. We're asleep. The earthquake happens. My team immediately starts putting together an effort to respond to this, right? And we don't do any of the work ourselves. We're just the medium that people, use. So they start connecting with charities. They start connecting with influencers. People start raising money. And I wake up and it's Fajr time, and already, there's multiple campaigns, thousands of dollars raised. And it ended up, I think right now we're almost at $10 million raised through hundreds of various efforts across the world to raise money, for the victims and the rebuild over there in Turkey, including some really cool influencers. And that's, beautiful to see that you have like the Ertugrul actor Engin using Launchgood to raise money, to lend his name to try to help raise support and relief for this. And so it's a terrible incident. We can't prevent that, but I'm very inspired to see that, our team is at least, able to do that, like come together, move really fast, and help immediately empower the community to start raising, funds to support the relief effort. So that was like a very recent one that comes to mind as well.
MashaAllah. I think one of the questions that comes up for people when they are presented with an opportunity to donate or support to a crowdfunding campaign is this legitimate? And I'm wondering if there are things in place structurally with, like, for example, a crowdfunding platform like Launchgood that helps to reduce or mitigate that risk. And any advice you can give just on that topic for people that again might be hesitant to contribute to a crowdfunding campaign?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So there's the first thing I would say about this is, like, you should only give to something that you trust. Right. So if you see a stranger raising money on the internet, no matter how good the story is, don't just assume it's true. Right. We've seen, at least on sometimes on other platforms, GoFundMe, these like really incredible stories, and then it turns out the whole thing was like a fraud. So you should always only donate to those things you trust. If it's by an organization or people you trust, or if you have a friend, let's say, sharing it, you could ask them, like, why are you sure this is legit? When it comes to Launchgood itself, we actually have to be super strict. So even with Turkey, I mean, this was really sad in a way, for me personally, but probably half of the charities that were trying to fundraise for Turkey, we had to reject. And the reason we had to reject them is, in a lot of cases, they're small charities, they're on the ground, they're doing really good work, but they don't have the documentation, the audits, the proof of execution of funds, etc., that meet the standard of our compliance team. And their one bad apple could get us completely shut down as a platform.
Right.
And so we do have to be extra strict on Launchgood. Now, the plus side of that is, if you're a donor, I would have a lot of confidence donating on Launchgood, because I know how strict we are. Even recently, like Imam Zaid Shaker, he's supporting this brother in Puerto Rico, and my compliance team was asking for all this receipts and stuff to show that the thing that this brother in Puerto Rico needs, assistance with is real. And Imam Zaid's like, wait, I'm not like enough of a kind of witness, and I'm like, okay, like, guys, we can trust Imam Zaid, inshallah, let's not maybe be as strict with this one. But I know my team is very strict. We do make exceptions. Like if it's the first time, sometimes we'll be like, okay, we'll let you raise money now, but before we're going to let you come back a second time, you got to prove that you actually use the money you raised through Launchgood the first time.
Okay.
Yeah. But I will say, all of that said, this is a controversial take. I don't believe our religion, and I could be totally wrong, so please interject. I don't believe our religion actually teaches us to worry too much about the impact and follow through of our charity.
Yeah.
Because it's the actual act of giving itself is the charity. Like Aisha radiallahu anha, she would perfume her coins before she would give her sadaqah. Like it doesn't even matter who that person asking money is. It's like, this is a gift I'm giving to God. You're just the means for that. And there's one of the stories, I believe, from the children of Israel of, a man who intended to give charity. And I'm just going to make it quick, but one night he goes out and gives it to a man. Turns out it was a thief. So the next night he gives out to this woman. Turns out she was a prostitute. Third night he goes out, gives it to a really old man. And it turns out he's actually the wealthiest man in town. And he feels like such an idiot. Like, I'm trying to give charity and I keep giving it to the wrong people. And then the angel comes and tells him, actually the charity you gave to a thief got him to stop his thievery. And the charity you gave to a prostitute, she's just doing that to support her family. Now she was able to leave that. And the charity you gave to the rich man, he's richer than you, and he felt ashamed. And now he's giving so much charity because of your act. So sometimes, we do things and we're like so focused on impact. Imagine if someone, a charity gave you a donor play. Oh yeah, donation you gave, it funded a brothel. Right? You'd be like, what? No, it's like the opposite of what I'm doing with charity. But it's the act of giving itself, which is the real virtue and value of the charity that we give.
Right, and I'm glad you mentioned that too, because a lot of times we may slip into feeling that we have to judge and make a judgment call on whether something is valid or not valid, whether it's deserving or not. And my teachers have always emphasized it's not our concern for the most part. I mean, if something is blatantly obvious, of course, right, common sense. But for the most part, like you said, right, the intention is to give for the sake of Allah, and that's our portion. And you're fulfilling then, the incentive to give in charity, and that is what Allah is pleased with. So I would 100% agree with you in that. So what are some ways that people can use crowdfunding, or what are some various examples of different crowdfunding campaigns? Right, one would be like a crisis and emergency response, that somebody's basic needs or a group's basic needs must be met. You mentioned the example of a couple of elders within our community and publishing. What else?
We covered some good examples with them. One I didn't mention, which I believe is actually the most valuable type of crowdfunding, is supporting the development of individuals. So you asked me what, earlier, I didn't, I gave you some answers, but you asked me what my early, favorite crowdfunding campaigns are. There are some that I'm sure will be my favorite crowdfunding campaigns, but not yet, because we've had some campaigns where we supported brilliant young people in Indonesia and Palestine get to go to Carnegie Mellon, get to go to Oxford, do degrees, do leadership programs. And I'm like, maybe one day, because we brought this person from, Jakarta to Cambridge, they'll, become the prime minister of Indonesia, and they're going to have this incredible positive impact in the world. And it's all because some people put together a few $1,000s for that person's development. It's, I think of it as like the Salman al-Farsi effect, right? That we know the companion, there's a companion of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. His name is Salman al-Farsi, Salman the Persian. And he was a slave. He was a slave in Medina. No family connections, no intrinsic value. If you think about what is his value outwardly to community, it just seems like no value there. And the Prophet ﷺ actually crowdfunded with his companions to get the money to free him. And you might think, oh, there's so many better ways we can use the community resources. Masjid Nabawi never even had a full roof. It never even had a paved floor or something, right? There's so many ways you can think we can use that money as community, maybe better, quote unquote, than freeing a slave. But because they freed Salman, what was Salman instrumental later on down the line?
The battle.
Battle of the Trench.
Yeah.
The largest army ever assembled in history of Arabia came to wipe out Islam in Medina. And it was this freed slave that had the strategy to save the Muslims. Inshallah. And so I think about that a lot, even myself as a convert. There were just a couple of things in my life, very small, that made a very big difference. I think one of them, studying Arabic in Jordan that summer. Alhamdulillah, mashallah, I got a scholarship. If I didn't get that scholarship, there's no way I could have afforded it. And then doing the Rehla program. And I literally used every dollar I'd saved up from odd summer jobs for 2-3 years to be able to pay for that. But those two, incident program, things changed my life. Yeah. And making Hajj, I'd add that. I made Hajj in 2009. And I think a lot of the work I do today is a result of the du'as at that Hajj. And so these are small things, like a few $1,000s each, that have set me up for success. And inshallah, that's a success that the community, the global Muslim community, gets to share in. And that's what I would love to see more on Launchgood. If there's one thing I'd love to see a lot more on Launchgood, is individuals going out there and raising money to help, prepare or set up for success in the future generation.
Inshallah. Just individuals. Just on a practical level, I mean, if we looked at it, that investment in Sayyidina Salman al-Farsi, radiallahu anhu, I mean, it turned out to be the best investment possibly, because he helped to save the Muslim community at that point. If they hadn't dug the ditch based on his suggestion, and would the Ummah have survived even? So exactly. that's a great example. And I'm actually really happy to hear this idea too, right? This idea to invest in individuals even. So I've
Yeah.
seen some things coming along the lines of, right, investments, because, the reality is, right, sacred knowledge, studying knowledge even, is not an easy task. It's not an easy endeavor, let alone being employed once you've devoted, 4, 6, 8 years or more to that. It's very difficult to, take care of your family at that point, oftentimes, especially in the Western world or maybe anywhere now. So that's a great opportunity as well for people to support those who will hopefully, God willing, inshallah, help preserve this religion in the world.
And it's such an honor for us supporting them too, right? I think there's you know better than me, but a story or hadith with the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam where there's two brothers. Maybe one of them was spending his time studying with the Prophet, and the other was working in the marketplace so he could earn money to subsidize his brother to study. And it's like the one who's doing that gets the full reward of the one that's studying too,
MashaAllah.
or is even better in a way. So we
Yeah.
all have a role to play, but without the Prophet ﷺ said, the scholars are the inheritors of the Prophet. And so if we don't support sacred knowledge and those studying, then what do we even have left?
That's amazing, because a lot of times, right, people will wish or have or wonder, right, in terms of the work that they're doing, that if it's valuable versus, let's say, becoming a student of knowledge and following that path, they're having to deal with the practical world more so. And that's a great example too that you shared, because if they're able to then fund and support the faith, the religion, goodness, piety, righteousness in the world, they're getting the reward of that. So one of, our Sheikh would often point to the example of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. One of the reasons he had such a high rank is because he gave so much in terms of his wealth, just to fund the survival of the Islamic Ummah and the survival of the Prophet ﷺ and so on. So this brings us to one last maybe point that I'd like to discuss with you, and it has to do with identity and work. We had a brief chat about this earlier, and the idea that, people's identity often gets, or nowadays especially, people want their identity to be deeply integrated with the work, and that may or may not always be the case. Previous generations just simply worked, but now we have this much stronger apparent need to make our work meaningful and aligned with, let's say, our purpose and who we are. What would you say about this topic, Brother Chris? And with your experience, especially working, right?
We talked about a little earlier, but like a new thought popped in my mind, which is, pre-industrial revolution, I think people were actually more defined by their work, right? That people, their names, like you'll see over there, like their name's Haddad, like literally their name is iron worker, right? Like that's what they did. They worked iron, or Najjar, like carpenter, right? So they were carpenter, and like that was their family name. But it's different, like, and then industrial revolution, people just cogs in machine, they're just like, whatever, working on assembly line. They don't really take on the identity of their employer per se. And today in the world we live in, like, most people, let's say if they go to college and come out of college, they'll join Googler, they'll be Google and they'll be a Googler, right? Or they join Launchgood and they're Launchgood, and there's something nice in that, but I think there's something dangerous, even with a company like Launchgood, that if people, like, it can be dangerous to associate your identity, and especially, let's say, your religious values too much with your company, because they could even end up using it as a crutch for everything, for their social life or their sense of meaning and purpose. I think there's nothing wrong with finding meaning and purpose with your job, even if it's, like we talk about baking bread, right? And historically, that was actually something you'd find is very common, is that people saw ihsan in their work, regardless of what it was. It didn't have to be religious work, quote unquote, to be meaningful and rewarding. It was the perfection of their work. And I think that's what people are missing a little bit. They're looking for the meaning in their work by the actual function of the company. And I think they need to find the meaning of work in the execution of their work, regardless of what it is. And that's a trend, and we talked about it, but for the sake of the podcast, it's really interesting and, to me, an alarming trend of one of the things we're seeing happen in the world today. So I'm subscribed to a newsletter called Morning Brew. It's sort of like a business publication for millennials, and they're 20 2022 word of the year or phrase of the year was quiet quitting. This idea that about a third of American employees are actively disengaged from their work. So they basically quit on their job without formally quitting. They're just going to keep taking a paycheck as long as they can. And when I think about that as a Muslim, it's just like, it's so antithetical. Like you should feel a sense of responsibility. If you're collecting a paycheck, for example, like there's an amana there, there's a trust there. And then also like just, it feels so unfulfilling to me. Like if you're just going into a job every day and you don't even enjoy what you're doing, or you're not even like trying to do it with ihsan, what's the point? Your life is, the way you act in your work is going to affect how the rest of your life is.
Yeah.
And the thing that I love about, so many of these stories of old, we could say, that, and it's not even old, like probably where you live, like you can see it in front of you, is that people have very basic jobs, but they really care about the work that they do. The image that's coming in my head, I remember one of my Moroccan teachers talking about the leather workers in Fez. Have you ever visited where they make the leather in Fez?
I haven't.
The pictures are famous. They, they can see they're on the rooftops. They have all these like little pools of different dyes, and they're tanning the leather and dyeing them. And it's very cool. But if you actually go there, it smells horrible. Have you heard about this? Or do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Oh, it smells really, really bad, because the way they break down the leather hide is with basically, like, I think pigeon droppings, right? Like the poop from birds it has acidity that's able to soften the hide and stuff. So it smells really, really bad. In fact, when you go up there, they give you like a chunk of nana, like mint, and you're supposed to hold it under your nose. Otherwise you can't tolerate it. So it looks really cool. It smells really bad, but the people that work there, and they're spending all day like in this, bird poop soup, at the end of it, like they go to the hammam, they scrub themselves down, they put on the itar, they put on the nice clothes, and you have no idea they just spent their whole day working in like effectively garbage, because they're doing it with ihsan. And that's something that I think it doesn't matter what you're doing. You could be working at Launchgood, you could be working at, your local garbage collecting agency. But if you do your work with ihsan, you find the ihsan in the process of your work, you will find ihsan in your life.
MashaAllah. That's beautifully said, and probably a good place for us to end here too, because the way that the Prophet of Allah ﷺ described the religion in the hadith of Jibreel, that there is this understanding of Islam at the level of Islam, which are the pillars, and then Iman, which are the beliefs, but ultimately aspiring to this maqam al-ihsan, which is what I would translate as excellence or spiritual excellence, in which one is always aware of the presence of God. And so he's always with us, right? And so it's the work that we do. If we bring that ihsan into it, and I've actually made a few videos on this, it becomes a form of worship. It becomes a form of respect to Allah, that this is the means through which He is providing us our sustenance, something He's given to us. And I've remarked on this since I've been in Turkey, because I've noticed in the US, for example, because it's primarily often the psychology is profit driven in a lot of the things that people do. I've noticed that once a business becomes successful and then it grows and it duplicates or franchises, and you just see the quality, rapidly diminishing as they open up more stores or more branches or more chains. And the interest isn't there to maintain the level of excellence, right? Because now it's become a part of this machine operating system that is just designed to churn out income. Whereas I see here, you can go to places often years later and the quality is the same. They still maintain their quality. There's still the love in what they do, right? And so that's what makes the difference ultimately. I think it's a great place for us to end, actually, Brother Chris, because when we bring love into the work that we do, it becomes not only a form of worship, but it also then transmits something to people that receive that. And maybe that's a meta level identity with the work that we do, in terms of, people, for example, working at Launchgood, right? They're doing something in the ummah, doing it with excellence to support people within the ummah, to support the ummah. Something greater gets transmitted in that process. Does that make sense, the way I'm trying to explain it?
It does. Absolutely. And in fact, I love the way you framed it, which is there's a certain love that gets passed on.
Yeah, and then it's received too. it's very different when you go to and when you receive a product or even a meal from somebody that created it with love versus somebody that just did it to sell an item. It's a big difference in terms of the way it's received, and it inspires the individual then to also live their life with excellence and with love.
May Allah, protect us and help us. You just got me thinking about all this automation and how, we get machines to make our drinks now, and soon machines will be making our food, and labs will be making the meat. And it's like, where does Ihsan get to enter the process? The human connection get to enter the process anywhere now?
Yeah, that'll be a whole nother discussion, especially with AI now stepping in. We're outsourcing pretty much everything, even our thinking, it looks like. But yeah, mashallah, it's been wonderful to reconnect, Chris. And I pray that you guys, inshallah, hit your goal. What's next for you and what's next for Launchgood?
Well, we have Ramadan's coming up, right? So in the short term, that's the big thing for us. So it's a great time, actually. We have this very cool thing I'd encourage anyone to sign up for, called the Ramadan Challenge, where people sign up to automate their donations for 30 days. Tens of thousands of people participate. So millions and millions of dollars are generated for charities across the world, which is really great. We have a couple new things, which are very exciting. One is an iOS app is coming out, inshallah, very soon. So that was our first. We never had an app. It's always been a website, but it's going to be an app very soon, and we're excited about that. And then the other thing, which is live now, people can check it out, is called GiveWith. GiveWith.launchgood.com. And GiveWith is it's a very kind of creative product. I don't know if it will work. We'll find out. We just released it. But the idea is, just like you follow people on social media, you can sign up to give with people through Launchgood. So I could sign up to give with you, Ihsan. Like, let's say I sign up to give $10 with you. That means anytime you're making a donation on Launchgood, you can add $10 from me if you choose. And
like a matching donation.
So like right now I have, I shared it with a few of my friends. I have about $109 of give with following personally. So anytime I want to make a donation on Launchgood, I can add $109 to it automatically. I think, it's a kind of cool way of showing your support for your friends. With big followers, like kind of big influencers, it might, like I imagine some like Mufti Menk might be able to generate a give with of thousands of people maybe. Which could mean, if he's making a donation, he might be able to tag on $50,000 to it, which is life-changing, but it's not any one person giving the 50,000. It might be spread across 5,000 people. So that's a kind of cool product that people want to see what's new on Launchgood. That's new, givewith.launchgood.com.
That's a great idea, especially when you have people with large followings and that people trust them and what they do. Even a $5 donation from them then could be significant towards a massive change towards a project or an individual. Yeah, absolutely. And, the more I think we work together as a community, the more we will be successful. I think that hadith that God is with the group, Allah ma'al jama'ah, God is with the group, and we have to be a group. Like if we're not a group, then God's not with us. I think that's another meaning to that. MashaAllah. And again, more success to you guys, because I see you as a force for encouraging positivity and unity within the ummah, right? And moving people towards excellence, to be open-hearted, to be generous, which are core principles of our faith and religion. May Allah grant you guys success, and inshallah you meet your goals and your targets. Ameen. And the beautiful thing, I think, also with what you're doing, Brother Chris, is that your goals directly translate into the amount of benefit that this people in the ummah will actually experience. So may Allah grant you guys much more success. Ameen. Thank you so much. Thank you as well, inshallah. And where can people find you? Launchgood.com. Any other links? Launchgood.com. And personally, I'm pretty active on Twitter. So if you go on Twitter, you find my AR Blauvelt. AR is for Abdurrahman. So AR Blauvelt at Twitter, and otherwise on Launchgood. And, we have an amazing team in Launchgood. Like, they're all over the world. If we could ever help somebody, especially start a fundraiser, you just go to our website, you'll find a little chat button. We're going to take care of you. It'll be really a great experience, inshallah. Wonderful. Jazakallah khairun, Sayyidi Abdurrahman. And inshallah, hopefully we'll reconnect at some point for another conversation, follow up. Inshallah. All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I pray that you enjoyed and benefited from this discussion and episode on Soul of Islam Radio. To help us continue to bring you these meaningful conversations regarding spiritual development and faith, do us a favor and give us a positive review wherever you happen to be listening to this podcast. And if you can think of at least one person who may benefit from this content, share this episode with them. To learn more about Launchgood and with God's will and light, find a campaign that aligns with your values and that you could contribute to for the sake and pleasure of Allah Almighty, or to learn how to start a crowdfunding campaign of your own, head over to launchgood.com for more information and to become part of the New Muslim Project. To further connect with me and to continue the conversation, please visit us at soulofislamradio.com. With the will and grace of God, I look forward to connecting with you soon. To your divine and eternal success.